folks here so that they knew that we were recording before he started. So you can go ahead, Leslie, and start our recording.
Already done.
Great. Thank you, Leslie, and I will call this meeting to order. Thank you. And so I believe, Chuck, you said we have 9 of us here now, right?
That is correct.
Excellent. And so I encourage everyone to open the chat if you can, because then you can see if anyone says anything in the chat. You can also see who's present. Don't worry, Deidre. And then you can, if anybody joins, you can also see that we're being recorded in case you forget. Great. Our first item of business tonight is the approval of the September minutes. Hope you all saw that. I sent it out earlier this week and had a chance to read it. Does anyone have any comments on the September minutes before I call for a motion to approve them? Nope. Okay. May I have a motion to approve the September?
Moved.
Oh, okay. May I have a second?
Second the motion.
Okay. All in favor? I think you can go ahead and chat if your vote.
I cannot chat. I just looked.
Okay.
So I need to give a thumbs up because I
Okay.
can't chat.
Okay. So noted, Bob. I think I need 1 or 2 more, so folks can. Okay, I think I have it. Thank you very much. Great. Our next order of business is public comment. Do I have anyone who wants to speak for public comment?
Should I make the brave assumption that that would be me?
Yes, you can do that, Josh.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Since I normally would hand you stuff, I decided to just make a much shorter thing to make my life easier and shorter, which is probably happier for everybody. But just my quick public comment, first of all, to state the obvious that the Arlington Education Association recognizes that we are in challenging times and that there were a before times and there will be an after, and that you guys have a mandate to not only look at what's 2 inches in front of the car, but also what's 2 miles in front of the car as we drive down this very new road. And so obviously we're all going to work together to get through these challenging times. And Leslie has a presentation coming later that I won't even add to it, just to say it is quite honest. But what I want to talk about is not the 2 inches in front of the car, but 2 miles in front of the car. And just something briefly that in the after time, something we hope to talk about is compensation as it relates to a whole group. And once again, my eyes are wide open that this is not something happening today, but will be happening in the future. That when they talk about what do we look for as a plan for employee compensation, which is the largest part of the APS budget, we talk about a step and a COLA every year in the school system. We talk about every employee being on a scale, which right now doesn't happen. And so you lead to someone giving a step and some employees not getting anything. And then we talk about eliminating those longevity steps where you can wait for 4 years on a step. This to us would be the pinnacle of a plan in the after times. One thing the one number I want to bring before everybody, because part of our plan talks about tying the COLA to the Social Security increase. And if you missed yesterday, today is the 14th. So yes, this came out yesterday, that Social Security increase will be 1.3% this year. And so a long explainer from various groups will tell you they still use that one because in 1972, when they needed to tag to something, it was the only one that worked across the country. So it's something where Republicans and Democrats both hate it. So it's a number that when we talk about wanting some kind of COLA increase, the number we like to talk about is 1.3%. So said in the after times, or if there's somehow the budget somehow gets better, that would be a number to look at just to allow employees to keep their heads right where they are above water. As always, I represent the compensation committee for the Arlington Education Association as long as they'll have me. There's my email, and I'm always open for questions. Melanie knows how to find me too. So with that, I will cut myself off there. And if anybody has anything from questions for me, otherwise, thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Any other questions for Josh before he steps aside? Okay, thank you.
Thank you all. You have challenges ahead of you.
Okay. Bob?
yeah, I'm sorry, I did just think of some. Generally speaking, how many teachers have left? Or I guess, yeah, teachers is the proper question for you, Josh. How many teachers have left our school system?
So I'd have to get, I think the question you're asking, do you mean as a result of the pandemic or just in general?
Well, yes, that's a good point, because there would have been some people leaving anyway from retirement or perhaps other moves. Is there an unusual decrease in our numbers of teachers that you believe is caused by the pandemic?
Okay, that is a great question that I believe our president has some insight on. And Melanie, if it's okay with you, I will see if I can get an answer for what we believe is back from it. And I would say HR probably has some answers into this, but I know they're running crazy just trying to keep their heads above water as we all are doing completely different things.
Good enough, thank you.
Yes.
Yep, that's fine. Okay. Any other questions for Josh? Okay, great. Thank you very much, Josh.
Thank you.
Okay, great. And then now, do we have Monique? She is next on our agenda. I'm not sure if I saw her join.
She's here.
Oh, she is. Okay, great. Excellent. Monique, I had you on the agenda to talk about the update on the budget guidance. Oh, hello, Monique.
Hi, I'm sorry. I was a little quiet in the background.
That's okay. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I wanted to say that we are working on providing and drafting budget guidance with the help of with some insight from Leslie and Dr. Duran. And of course, each of the board members. We are working on bringing that forward in a meeting soon. I don't have the meeting date in front of me, Leslie. You may have the date at the top of your head. Oh, it's on the 22nd. It's next week.
It is on the 22nd.
There we go. Sorry. I'm switching head gears from my regular day job to this job. So the 22nd, and then we will vote on it at the following meeting on November the 5th. I would share with you that, as Josh has mentioned, we are, of course, concerned about the budget. And I know Melanie and Chuck can probably speak to that, and Leslie will share. But and as all of you know, we have challenges not only with the upcoming year, but also with this year. And I want to thank each of you for, I've seen some of you volunteering to meet with some of our other groups as we continue to look for ways that we can address potential and expected budget shortfalls. Speaking about our budget guidance, and I know that Bob had shared recently again that the group worked last year to help work proactively to help give us some guidance around how we would pull together the budget. And some of the main takeaways from there include that you guys wanted transparency and early look at the budget. And I think that I feel that we're working in that way by offering you the presentation tonight that Leslie's going to share with you, and also offering that presentation to the leads of many of our organizations that you all have so graciously offered to help them wade through. And we are also being transparent by showing on a bi-weekly basis where we are with our current budget and about budget challenges as well. So that's one of the main areas that I think that we are trying to be, and that we are showing that we're being receptive to some of the ideas that came out last year. Some other ideas included that we look at ways across the county to try to see if there's any efficiencies. I'm not sure that how far we're going to get on that, but I think one of the things that this is going to help us do as we have to look at tightening our belt is trying to figure out if there are some ways that we can reevaluate and look at what we do to try to find some efficiencies. So we are aware of your suggestions from last year. I hope you feel that we, in sharing our budget situation, are being somewhat responsive to it. And I just want to thank each of you for offering to help our community talk through how we're going to face and deal with our budget challenges.
Thank you, Monique. And then we heard from Leslie that there will be a copy posted on Friday, the 16th. That will be this Friday because it goes up on board docs in advance of next Tuesday's meeting. Is that the case, so that we can take a look at it as early as Friday?
Yes, that is correct. And I appreciate you bringing that up, Melanie. Yes. So you guys can take a look. And of course, we'd be happy to hear any feedback. We're welcome it.
Okay, great. If that's the case, if you are open to feedback for the rest of the committee, I will go ahead and take a look at it on Friday, and I can circulate it to this committee and solicit any input. We'd have to do so quickly, everyone. So I just ask that everyone take reserve some time on your calendars this weekend to take a look, send me any thoughts that you have, and I can compile them and get them back to Leslie and Monique on behalf of the committee. And thank you then, Monique, for taking any feedback or suggestions that we have as a committee.
Absolutely. I'll be here in the background while the meeting continues.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that update. Does anyone have any questions for Monique while she's here with us in the forefront? Before you disappear to the background? And Chuck, I think you have your hand raised.
I do. Monique, just kind of more of an atmospherics kind of question. Obviously, I think the community is focused on reopening because that's the near target. At least my sense, I don't know that many in the community are well read in on the budget situation, and just curious your sense from your perch, how aware the community is that, we've got the reopening shoe that's about to drop, but then shortly following upon that is going to be this robust discussion about, any potential deficits and how we solve that. Just to get a sense of where the community may be outside of our own understanding, which is probably, which is obviously a little bit better than the average person.
That's a great question, Chuck, and I appreciate, I think, the preface of your question. The preface of your question implies that people are looking at reopening, and that's really where a lot of the attention is. I would agree with you. But that's why during our reopening monitoring reports, we always include a session with Leslie and where we are on the budget, so that when people are tuned in to the most important thing, I think that's on most people's minds, they're also being made aware that this is causing some budgetary challenges. And I think we have mentioned that, this is what we're facing for this year, but we could be facing additional challenges in the future as well. So we're trying to keep that on the minds of folks. And in addition to that, we're also keeping that on the minds of our county counterparts by making sure that we're sending a letter after every board meeting to show them as well where we are, so that as they're looking at their budget, they will also understand, as the people who actually send over money for us to use, where we are and the challenges that we're facing. So I would agree with you that this might not be on the forefront of people's minds, but we are trying to use the space that is capturing people's attention to also share what we're facing. And then in addition to that, the idea of having a meeting in October about, folks, we are facing some budget challenges with the leaders of all of our major advisory groups, and then asking you guys to work with the groups throughout the month of October to get back to us to share what their thoughts are on how we might close our gap, I think is another, grassroots way and maybe grass tops way to also filter that information down and to get good information that you guys can also contemplate as you help us in your official capacity, even though they will be sharing their information with us directly. I think it's also a great opportunity for you guys to have information on various touch points for people for you to understand where many people are on this issue. This is, I think, a new, unprecedented way for us to look at the budget and our budget concerns by starting this early. And this work that is specifically meant to help us address shortfalls for the budget we are currently in will also serve as a foundation for work that we need to start in just another few weeks on our upcoming budget, and starting also, of course, with our budget direction next week. So I hope I answered that question, Chuck.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, Monique, because I know it seems like there's a lot of information swirling around that, and I think most parents are focused on getting their kid back, and there's another unhappy tale on the backside of this. So hopefully they're not losing sight that there's there's an equally big problem that we're going to wrestle with, and we will all feel it in whatever way we decide to solve it. So no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions for Monique? While people are thinking, and if they're formulating a question, raise their hand, Monique, I'll ask you one, which is, do you have any sense of going into the joint working session with the county next week of how much help they may be able to provide us for this year? So obviously it's harder to close a budget gap if you are in a year. You have people on the payroll every month that goes by. Even if you were to choose to furlough employees or reduce employees, obviously you lose flexibility each month that you have them because you don't have the benefit of a full year of reduction, or you have spent expenses that you may have had in the budget and they're already spent and gone. As you get into a budget, you have less and less flexibility about what you can reduce in that budget. And so I think the bigger question is, the longer we go into the year, the harder it is to close a large budget gap. So I don't know if you have any sense of what the county may be able to do to help us with this year's budget gap, which to me is harder to close than a future budget gap.
I appreciate that question, Melanie. I will share with you that this joint budget work session with the county was set up particularly with the opportunity for us to have a conversation that would be constructive, because by that point, they hope to have had enough information to understand what the real economic picture looks like. And so I think we'll find out for sure what that is during that meeting. So feel free to tune in. But I would also share that through our weekly letters and also our leadership meetings, which we have with the leadership of the county board and the county manager, and that I and Barbara Cannon and Dr. Duran sit in, we constantly share what the concerns are. And we've been able to keep close tabs and we've been able to update the grids that Leslie has been able to share, because we've been looking at ways to access their CARES dollars. And they have been helpful with sharing with us CARES dollars and other support. It seems as though the $500,000 that they gave us for Comcast is not fully utilized, because we found some other ways to support our community with ensuring that they have Wi-Fi. So we might be able to repurpose some of that money. And you may have heard at the last school board meeting that the CARES dollars are now also eligible for personnel services that have been used to help deal with the with COVID and the pandemic. And so we continue to look at ways for them to support us. And I would say that, so far they've been good partners in helping us utilize some of those federal dollars. And then, of course, we'll have to see what happens with additional, funds that may come and flow, as well as some possibilities that we may have access to a hold harmless regarding sales tax revenue. So there's a few things that we're looking at, but I think the most important information will come later during the joint budget work session. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, that's helpful. I'll definitely tune in. Thank you. And Deidre, I saw you raised your hand, so please, you're next.
I was just going to ask, this was sort of a follow-up question, really, Melanies, and you sort of touched on it, and that was with respect to the CARES funding. And I saw the recent news of 4.7 million going to APS. Is that something that will be available immediately, or something that would be helpful to us in the next budget year?
So when it comes to CARES funding, the CARES funding comes with a caveat that it has to all be spent by the end of this calendar year. And so we're looking for, and we have plenty of ways to reimburse expenditures from, some of the personnel costs or the salary costs for those people who are doing this work, in addition to the technology and other aspects. So we will be able to use all those dollars in the time in which it will be given. And Deidre, I see your hair gotten longer.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Monique.
Yeah, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Monique? I'm looking in the chat too. I don't see any. Okay.
I hope I didn't steal any of Leslie's thunder.
No, that was
Not
all.
hardly, Monique.
we have lots more to cover. We really appreciate you covering that part of it and also being open to comment. And like I said, for everyone, I will pull down the budget guidance. I will share it, and I look forward to everyone's input. Again, I'll just need quick turnaround on that, given the timeline you heard from Monique, so that we can make sure that our input is into them in a timely fashion. So thank you, Monique.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. Next up, we have Leslie's going to give us a deeper dive into a town hall meeting that she has given to a couple of audiences. One was to heads of the school board advisory committees and the superintendent advisory committees in advance of the project that was launched, or initiative that was launched, to help get all of the committees really thinking about the challenge around the budget gap this year and going into next year, and so that we can ideate together about ways that we can help close the budget gap. And this is the initiative that I wrote to everyone about, that we're going to be working and partnering with those other committees to help lend our knowledge as they do thinking using their areas of expertise to bring additional ideas to the table. I'll talk a little bit more after Leslie's presentation about our additional part of it, which is that we as a committee will also want to bring together our collective ideas for Leslie and the school board around ways to address the budget gap, in addition to the separate reports that each committee is going to do, so that each committee, including the BAC, is putting something forward at the end of this. And I'll talk a little bit about the process for how we can collect ideas from this committee and pull something together. But we wanted you to have the benefit, and I thank Leslie for being willing to present this again to our committee this evening and go deeper in this. We had originally planned to have Aaron Gregory come and speak to our committee tonight around the whole topic of equity and how he is addressing that, and how the school system is addressing that, and how that really plays out in the budget and would play out in the budget, especially in a year like this. But very sadly, he had a death in the family and was not able to join us this evening. He has offered to come to a future meeting, and so we will reschedule him, as that is a very important topic for the school system, for the budget, for us. But it did present an opportunity, which I think actually is very valuable for us to hear this presentation from Leslie, not just on a recording, but actually live, so that we can actually have a nice dialogue and Q&A session following it, which prepares us well for these sessions with the other committees, and then to talk about how we can pull forward our additional ideas from the Budget Advisory Committee for Leslie and the school board about how to close the budget gap. So thank you, Leslie. I hope that was a good preamble. I'll let you give an even better one as you start the presentation, but thank you for being willing to do this session with us tonight.
Absolutely, and I have no better preamble than that one, so that's great. Pull up my presentation here. And I had a little bit of trouble. I did this presentation earlier today for the employee advisory groups, and I had a little trouble apparently with some of the slides, some people not being able to see some of the figures on the slides when there were charts. So if you will let me know if there's something that I'm talking about that you're not seeing on a slide, that would be very, very helpful.
Will do.
All righty. Can everybody see the presentation?
I can see it.
Okay, great.
Yep.
What I'm going to do tonight is basically walk you through the same presentation I gave to each of the advisory groups and committees. And so what we talked about, we had an agenda, we did some introductions, and then we talked about the role, some financial projections, the fiscal outlook for FY22, the questions that we gave them to take back to their groups for discussion and feedback, resources that are available, and then we wrapped up. So I'm going to walk through that as a result. So the role that we asked our advisory committees and groups to play is one of, I would equate it to train the trainer. I'm providing the information to the heads of these committees and groups, the leaders, for them to take.
Leslie, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Monique says she's not seeing the presentation. Is anyone else not seeing the presentation? Oh, Chuck, are you not seeing it?
Okay, let me stop and I'll do it another way.
Okay.
Now?
I can see it.
Now I see it.
Oh, excellent.
It messes
Okay.
everybody else.
Is there any other problems? Anyone else not seeing it?
Thank you, Leslie.
Okay.
Absolutely. That's why I started out that way, because there have been a few issues. All right, so agenda, I talked about the agenda, and now I'm going to talk about the role. And as I said, the role that we asked them to play was that of hearing this information as the leader of the advisory group or committee, and then being able to take that information back to their committee or group and walk them through the information, review the discussion questions, and then get feedback, and then provide me with that feedback. We talked about financial projections, and those of you who've been following along with the school board meetings and the monitoring update that the superintendent gives at every school board meeting will have seen some of this information before. This is the latest information that we have as of last Thursday, and I'm going to walk through this relatively quickly. For FY21, these are the revenue projections that we have at this time, and as I start into this, I want to say that every dollar figure that you see on these slides is the information that we have right now at 7:32 on October the 14th. And it will absolutely 100% change, and it will change almost every day. So when I show this to you today, this is not set in stone. This is what I know right now. And all of this is subject to a lot of differentials, different factors. It has to do with everyone in every department providing me with the information that they have when they have it. If they delay telling me about something and they've already done it, then I don't know it and I can't show it here. So I'm relying on people to provide me with information. I'm relying on, and that has to do with cost projections as well as savings projections, as well as any revenue that they see in their departments that I might not have a handle on. So every single thing is predicated on something, whether it's an assumption or a knowledge at a particular moment in time, or estimates of something that could change based on decisions that are made down the road. Have I caveated this enough for you? Because I want to be sure everybody understands this is a moment in time based on what we know right now, based on the information that we have and the work that we've been able to do to this point. And it's going to change. But having said that, I'm going to move on. Revenue projections. Yes.
Well, it looks like Bob raised his hand. Yep.
Yes.
Thank you, Leslie. These numbers are on the entire annual basis. This isn't just for the first quarter or anything. And I know that this is the effect that is seen in the first quarter, but is this an effect that you expect to be experienced over the entire year?
This is information predicated on being in the virtual model through the first quarter with as much information as we have available, and it is predicated on an annual basis. So okay. When I look at, for example, the county revenue decrease, that is for the entire year. That's not the first quarter. That's not right now. That's up to now, and there could be more later. This is the projection for the entire year. That may or may not be the case for every single revenue or cost or savings projection, because there are so many different factors that play into what providing those estimates means. I will try to point it out as I go through here, but it's difficult. Just anyway.
Good, thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Good question.
And Leslie, Christina also has her hand up.
Yep.
First of all, just thank you for the Herculean effort that you and your team are undertaking, calculating these numbers so regularly. I know that these numbers have changed by the day, and so we're seeing it in real time. So just thank you for that, first of all. Just a clarifying question. The estimates are based on being in the virtual model through the first quarter. Did these also factor in the new or the modified return to school plan or any cost implications of the return to school plan? I know that it's evolving day by day as well, but how is that being factored in for quarter 2 and beyond?
Good question. I think I speak to that as I go through the presentation.
Okay, totally fine. Feel free to punt to later.
Feel free to bring me back to that later if you feel that I haven't provided that information for you.
And Leslie, Juan also raised his hand, and Bob, you have to put your hand down. I think you just, no, yeah, Bob, you have to put your hand down. And then Juan has his hand up too, Leslie.
Okay, great.
Juan, you might be on mute.
Disregard mistake.
Oh, you're all set?
Yes.
Okay.
All righty, I'm going to move on. County revenue. This is the county revenue decrease projection for FY21, and that is for the entire year. The county has projected a revenue decrease of between $42 and $60 million for the entire year. That, of course, means that we get to share in that revenue decrease because we also share in any revenue increases. So that's part of the deal of having the revenue sharing with the county, is that we also share in any decreases. So for us, that means somewhere between $14 and $21 million revenue loss. Hopefully on the smaller end, but it could be on the higher end. To help offset some of this, the county has also earmarked from their CARES Act funding $7 million for schools. And that is out of their amount of CARES Act funding that they got. I know they got at least 20 million in one set and then another 20 million in another iteration. So they've set aside $7 million for us. And this amount of money is reimbursement money. It is predicated on the fact that we would have $7 million worth of eligible CARES Act expenditures that can be reimbursed with these funds. I believe that we will, but I want to make sure that everybody understands that there is an eligibility criterion that is associated with every expenditure that we claim for reimbursement. So we have to be careful that we have expenditures that can make up this $7 million, or we don't get all $7 million. In addition, there came pretty recently, in the last 3 weeks or so, notification that we could, as part of CARES Act reimbursement, claim administrative costs. And what this means, instead of just claiming things that we had to pay extra over and above what we normally would have paid for items in our budget or things that were associated with COVID, they are allowing us to claim costs for people that were on the payroll the entire time that we would normally have paid anyway, because they were, excuse me, did this earlier today, I gotta stop that. They were, majority of their time was spent directing COVID-related, policy or program design changes and implementation. So we did do some of this for fiscal year 20, from the March 16th to the June 30 timeline. Now we're looking at doing it for July 1 through December 30. So hopefully we will get some reimbursement there. I can't say how much it's going to be because, we could say, hey, county, we have $10 million worth of administrative costs that can be reimbursed. And the county will say, well, we only have $3 million for you of that 10 million. So here's 3 million, which is great, but I don't know what that amount is at this point. We have to put together what those costs are and then give them to the county, and then they'll tell us what they can provide us for reimbursement. So we're still working through all of that. On the state side, we have we were informed previously that the sales tax, state sales tax, obviously decreased because of COVID and the closures. And that was a $3.6 million decrease for FY21. I do know that both the House and the Senate versions of the budget bill and the General Assembly have a hold harmless provision in it for the state sales tax decrease. So hopefully that will pass and we won't have to worry about this 3.6 million, but until that actually passes, I'm not counting my chickens before the eggs hatch. That doesn't include any other state revenue changes. However, the General Assembly declined to do anything about the budget until they reassemble in January and go through the budget process then. So we'll know more later. Hopefully there won't be any huge changes, but we don't know that yet. We did receive noticed late Thursday afternoon that we will be getting an additional $4.73 million in state CARES Act funding directly to the schools. That's coming directly from the state to the schools as part of the state's allocation of CARES Act funding. And that is for us, again, for eligible CARES Act expenditures. So we have now 7 million and 4.73 million for eligible CARES Act expenditures, which is great. Will not turn down any money. Local revenue, and Christina, this might relate to your question. Our extended day program, for those of you who don't know, is our before and after school care program that we provide to students, obviously before and after school. And typically they run a program, they charge tuition, and the tuition covers all of the expenses of the extended day program. Our extended day employees are currently being paid. We elected to pay them in the first quarter of school, and most, if not all, extended day employees were repurposed in other tasks other than extended day, because we're not offering extended day right now. And they were used in different schools for different purposes and across the school division. We are going to continue to use our extended day personnel, and there are very specific needs for them as we move into level 1, level 2, and level 3 return to school. As a result, we are incurring expenses for which we do not have offsetting revenue, because the extended day program was self-supporting. Every expenditure was offset by a revenue they brought in for tuition. So this revenue loss figure here includes the fact that we will not have an extended day program estimated through June 2021 unless we come back fully into the normal school year, not hybrid, but the normal before times school, in which we can then provide extended day. But until that time, we are predicting that that's not going to happen through June of 2021, and therefore we are recognizing that we will not have any extended day tuition revenue for the school year. In addition, we're not going to have the same amount of aquatics revenue. We're not going to have building use revenue because our buildings are not open to be used. Our bus camera fines revenue will be down because we're not running buses. Once we start running buses, we might see that change. I believe that the estimate I have here is only for the first quarter, not for the entire year. So we'll have to see how that plays out through the year. And I think that's it for local revenue. Let me check. I do see a question. Juan?
Yes, wanted to ask you, Leslie, and thank you very much for the presentation. Wanted to ask if any of the extended daycare costs could be allocated under the CARES Act funding. I know it was self-generating, but I was just wondering, would it qualify any?
It depends on what the extended day staff are doing and whether or not it relates directly to the approved uses of CARES Act funding. So for example, if our extended day personnel are involved in screening students and staff as they get on buses or come into the buildings, then yes. But if they're being used for other things that might not relate to CARES Act, I don't believe so. And I'm loath to kind of walk through what each of those scenarios might be, because the language is kind of vague in the CARES Act literature. So I can't say that because we have to split our elementary classes into 2 classrooms and we need, another person to monitor the students that are not in the classroom with the teacher at that time, then that qualifies as CARES Act funding. We have to dive a little deeper into some of the literature on that. So I'm not sure about that yet.
Thank you.
Sure. And then moving on to federal revenue, we have received 1.99 million in CARES Act funding for schools. That was our very first amount that we received, and we have put that to good use. So among all of the CARES Act funding, 7 million, 4.73 million, 1.9 million. It's about $14 million all told, plus perhaps a little bit more from the county, which is great. Again, keeping in mind that they have to be CARES Act eligible expenses, and we can't double count. And we've put a claim into FEMA for some of it, so we can't then ask for CARES Act money for the things that we've claimed under FEMA. Lots of moving parts on that. Medicaid reimbursement loss. This is Medicaid reimbursement for services that we provide to certain students. Obviously, with schools closed, we haven't been able to get any of those reimbursements. As we move into level 2 and level 3, level 1, level 2, level 3, there might be an opportunity to recoup some of this, but that remains to be seen. So we've shown it for the whole year. If that changes, then we'll come back and revisit this number. Revenue projections, somewhere between a $19 million and a $26 million revenue loss that we can see at this moment, subject to change. It could be less. The $3.6 million could go away. The $0.8 million for Medicaid reimbursement could be less. County revenue could change. State revenue changes could come in, and we could have more revenue loss there. Lots of moving parts at this moment, but this is what we know right now, 19 to 26 million. We'll move on to cost projections. We've tried to categorize the types of costs that we're seeing into the 5 categories: health and safety, technology needs, instructional needs, mental health and well-being, and other. You can see our estimates there. The PPE cost is an estimate, I believe, for what we know right now that we will need for the entire year, based on some assumptions. If our assumptions prove to be incorrect, or we move more slowly or more quickly into different levels than we had estimated, then that could change. Same thing with the screening, the supplies and the personnel needed for screening. That's being in the virtual model through the first quarter and needing those screeners in the second, third, and fourth quarters. If that changes in some way, then that estimate would change. Technology needs, those are pretty set. They're funds we've already spent trying to get everyone a device, including students and staff. So that's 2.5 million. Instructional needs, you can see the types of instructional needs that we are including in here, including all of the toolkits that were provided to students at the beginning of the year. Over the summer, we did elect to pay our social workers and bilingual family liaisons to stay working through the summer. They typically don't work in the summer. They're 10-month employees. So we did provide additional funding for them to work in the summer to continue to provide access to families and students to those things that they might need as a result of the pandemic. And then food service pay through the first quarter. Obviously, we did provide food and meal distribution to students in the first quarter, but at a fewer number of sites than all of our sites. Did elect to pay the remainder of the food service staff who were repurposed into other jobs during that time. And now all food service workers are going into food service mode because all of our schools will be open in level 1, and we will need to provide food service going forward from there in level 2 and level 3. All right, moving on. And then savings, obviously, because we're doing things differently than we normally do in this first quarter, we're being virtual. We know that we're going to have some savings like electricity and fuel, some overtime. We also looked at our additional replacement furniture and equipment for schools and decided that we wouldn't provide any additional furniture and equipment. So we would save all of the money that we have budgeted for that. And that's central office accounts, not school accounts. We're not taking anything away from the schools at the moment. Staffing contingency, we do have a staffing contingency in the budget, and because of changes in enrollment, we did have to use some of the staffing contingency, but not all of it, so we do have a savings there. And then the 1.47 million was already a contingency in the FY21 budget that we built in at budget approval against revenue loss, so we have that available to us as well. So just over $7 million in savings. And in summary, with the revenue projections and the cost projections that we have based on the information that we have and the savings projected, we have a shortfall in the current year of between $24 and $31 million. That will change. Hopefully it will go down. We do see some areas where, as I said before, revenue might change with the state sales tax being held harmless and some additional CARES Act funding from the county. Hopefully that would be enough to offset any other changes in revenue, such as other state revenue changes that could come down the line once the General Assembly starts looking at the biennial budget again. And then cost projections, that's what we know right now. Some could change, some could go up, some could go down based on how we move forward this year, and the same with our savings projections. So that's where we are right now. Could go down, could go up. We'll see how it goes, but this is where we are right now. Bob, you have a question.
Thank you. Yes. Last year, before we adjourned for the year, there was some information circulated about how you might project what the additional costs were going to be for reacting to the pandemic. And I see that you have some pretty detailed numbers there. How do they compare to what we were warned about last year? How is our experience compared to what we were warned of?
I believe that when I did that very quick calculation based on the formula, quote unquote formula that we were given, it was either 12 or $14 million. And as you can see here, we're right about 12. So we're pretty close to what we anticipated it was going to cost additional for reacting to the pandemic.
Are we heavier on the PPE though than what we might have expected?
I honestly have not done a line by line comparison, Bob. I would have to go back and look at that.
Okay, that's fine. I don't think you need to do that too. You don't need to follow up on that for me.
But overall, it's pretty close.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
Chuck.
Leslie, would delays in reopening, say, the level 2, level 3 reopenings, would those improve or worsen the overall financial situation?
if we have been able to capture what we believe the additional costs will be for moving into each of those levels, then it won't change this. But I don't know that to be the case, because what I have found throughout this process and throughout the last 7 months is that we don't know what we don't know.
Okay, no, that's fair. Thank you.
Melanie.
Hi, Leslie. Thank you for all of this. My question is around transportation. How much additional cost have you put in for transportation? Are you assuming we have to live with the cost that we have? Or have you put in some additional bus monitors? I do know that that is a piece of the puzzle that has not been completely figured out, given the limitations of how many students can ride on the bus and what students will want transportation as we get through the different levels of reopening. So curious to see how much of an unknown that still is versus what assumptions you've made in these numbers.
That's a good question. Transportation is still one of those things that we're trying to figure out. But in this cost projections line where we have screening and we show supplies and personnel, we have included a number of additional personnel to be bus attendants on the buses to do the screening at the bus stops of students before they get on the bus. Whether or not we've estimated the correct number that we will need and the time frame that we will need them for, we need to go back and look at it once we iron out exactly what we're doing. And we will. We've put an estimate in there, a certain number of bus attendants for a certain period of time. And once we have exactly what that will be, we will fix that. But I think we've included 95% of whatever that cost might be in here.
Okay, but have we made the decision that we do have to live within the fleet that we have?
We have made the decision that we have to live within the fleet that we have. We cannot afford to buy additional buses or hire additional drivers to make the transportation work.
Okay, great.
We will do other things.
Okay, so the cost will be, even if there are some differences in the assumptions, it's not huge. It's on the margin.
Right. And I say that we've decided that at 8:01 p.m. on October the 14th. And right. I am not the decision maker on that. It could change tomorrow.
Right. Okay. Understood.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. That's it. I'm going to move on. All right. So reminder, $24 to $31 million shortfall in FY21. When we move to FY22, this becomes a lot more, shall I say, loosey-goosey, because we have only a projected estimate for FY21 of what revenue is going to look like on the county side. They have not even begun to look at FY22, at least not that they're telling me. So I don't have any good information from the county at this point going forward. And a lot of the estimates that we normally use to calculate what the next budget year is going to look like is going to be impacted so much by what's going on right now. And I don't really know or have a way to determine exactly what that outcome is going to be. So let's walk through that and you can see what I'm talking about. Those of you who have done budget with me before, this should look a little bit familiar. We talk about revenue and expenditures, and we always start with the current year budget, and this is the budget as adopted. So what was adopted in May, not the budget that we're trying to fit into right now. As I said, the county is not projecting right now what FY22 revenue is going to look like. They want to get further into FY21 and see what the revenue streams are doing before they'll even consider looking or providing an estimate for FY22. So I just used the estimate that I have right now for FY21 to plug in here for FY22. So a decrease of somewhere between 14 and 21 million. If things get substantially better between January and June, then obviously this number will be lower. If it doesn't, then this number could be this number, it could be a higher number, but this is the best number I have right now. On the state side, state, federal, and other revenue adjustments, I really don't know at this point. I don't know what the General Assembly is going to do when they convene in January. One of the things that I am slightly worried about is the fact that our enrollment is down this year, and that could affect our FY22 revenue as well, because if they decide to adjust revenue based on September 30th enrollment, then that could lead to a little bit, well, not a little bit, but less state aid for us. Don't know about federal, don't know about other at this point. It's a little bit too far in the future for me right now. We do also have to consider the fact that we used about $16.5 million from reserves in one-time revenue for the FY21 budget that then comes off the top for FY22. We do have about $12 million in reserves that is available for the school board to use if they choose to use it in FY22. So that is something that we could look at to help us close the gap for FY22, but I have not included it here as a given. Moving on to expenditures. Again, we start with the current year budget as adopted, not the situation that we're in currently. And then we have enrollment growth, and this is the estimate that we have in the adopted budget for the forecast, and it's based on our projections from last fall for next fall, so a 2-year time horizon. Obviously, things are very different right now. Our enrollment is down below what we expected. It's actually, I think, down below where it was last year at this time. But we're not unique in that. Every school district is seeing that. Most school districts across the country are seeing a decrease in enrollment. So enrollment growth being $11 million, it could be something completely different from that. It could be something less than that. I mean, could be something less than zero even, if we project that our enrollment isn't going to grow and in fact will remain about the same. You know, we adjust our current year budget for what we see for next year, and this could actually be a negative number, but we don't know that right now. I don't have any enrollment projections. I won't have any until towards the end of December. One thing we do know is that the Reed School is going to open, the new elementary school at the Reed site is going to open in September of 21, and that will require additional ongoing administrative costs and some one-time costs to outfit the school to get it up and running for the opening. And we've estimated $3.4 million here, and that is not going to go away. Additional debt service is based on the FY21 CIP, and that's about $500,000. We have initiatives from prior year budgets. There are 2 of them: Arlington Tech expansion and additional technical support center technicians. And those are the technicians that are helping all of our staff and our students get their devices and fix their devices and all of that right now. So we need every single one of those technicians and then some. I've included a compensation increase, a step increase in here Per policy, right now, the school board's policy does say that we should include a step increase in the superintendent's proposed budget. When we had to redo the budget in the spring, the school board elected to waive that policy. They could do so again, but they have not yet. So this is included here per policy. VRS and health insurance increases, we've estimated those at around 2.9 million. I know that our health insurance premiums increased more than what we had estimated in this figure, so we will likely have to change that and adjust that accordingly. And then other adjustments, typically these are baseline expenditures, and we will be looking at those very, very carefully as we go into the next budget cycle to ensure that we really actually, in fact, need to increase those budgets. But a lot of times that's things that increase because we have a growing population, which we may or may not have next year, or because we have contracts with escalation clauses in them, specifically leases for our buildings, and also utility expenditures that continue to rise, especially now that we're adding an additional school for next year. So between the changes in revenue and the changes in expenditures, based on all the information that I have right now and some estimates, a lot of estimates that will be looked at and refined as we go through the budget cycle. And once this county starts to tell me what they're projecting for FY22 revenue, I'll have a better handle on that. Once the General Assembly convenes and I see where the state revenue is going, I have a better handle on that. Once we have enrollment projections in December, then I'll have a better handle on what enrollment growth will be. But right now, on October the 14th, we're looking at between a $67 and a $74 million deficit for next year. I'm going to stop there for any questions. All right, I'm moving on. Is this chart messed up to you guys too, or is it just me?
Messed up for me.
Yeah,
All right.
it's messed up
Definitely
for us.
messed up.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to pull out and I'm going to go to this. Better?
Yep.
Yes.
That's
Okay.
very odd that it does that when you're in presentation mode.
I know, doesn't it? It's driving me crazy. I don't know why it's doing that. All right, so this is where I'm going to start taking a little deeper dive for the BAC. So the next few slides are the same slides that I showed to the advisory committees and advisory groups in the last week and today. But then I want to take a little bit deeper dive for the BAC because it might help you get a better handle on the budget, as well as help you when you go out into the other committee meetings and discuss and facilitate with them around the budget. So for the FY21 adopted budget, we have a $670.3 million budget, and it comprises these 7 funds. The school operating fund is the largest piece of that at 83.5%. And then we have the other 6 funds over on the left-hand side. And we're going to concentrate on those in this next slide. Obviously, the biggest one of these other 6 funds is our debt service fund at 8.5%. That is our mortgage payments on all of our buildings that we have right now. That is not something that we can reduce. And I'm going to talk about all of this in context of where can we look to reduce our budget, both in FY21 and FY22, to help us get rid of these shortfalls, to help us close these gaps that we're seeing. And debt service, unfortunately, is not one of those places. These are the payments that we need to make on all the bonds that we've already sold for projects that we either have done and completed or are currently underway. For example, the new elementary school with the Reed site. We could not increase debt service as we go forward by postponing or stopping projects that are already in the works, but we're not going to reduce the amount that we already have taken on. And that's about $60 million. The next two funds I want to talk about are the Grants and Restricted Programs Fund and the Food and Nutrition Services Fund. And both of those funds they have revenues that match their expenditures, and their revenues come from sources other than, for example, county revenue. They come from other areas and are specific grants, and their expenditures are tied directly to that revenue. So if we said, okay, we're going to cut X grant and we're not going to spend the money anymore, then we also have to take out the revenue that goes along with it, because we're provided the revenue solely to fund that one activity that grant funds. So with the grants and the Food and Nutrition Services Fund, they're self-supporting. Cutting them doesn't do anything for us. So we leave those alone. They stay in the budget as is. The Children's Services Act Fund is a Virginia mandated fund that provides the funding for private placements for students with special needs. And because it is a mandated service that we have to provide, that is not something that we can cut either. Our Capital Projects Fund contains the funding for our Minor Construction Major Maintenance Program, or MCMM. Many of you have heard talk about that. We did cut the MCMM fund a lot for FY21 in order to balance the budget. Instead of being, I think it's about $6.3 million, it's about $2.6 million right now. So I would not recommend that we look at cutting that. In fact, I would recommend that we restore the funding for that, because that's what keeps our buildings going. We have a lot of money invested in new buildings and new facilities, but we need to make sure that the facilities that we have currently keep going. And that's where those funds come in addition to the everyday maintenance that we do in our buildings. These are the larger projects that we do to keep this going. And then our Community Activities Fund, and a very large portion of our Community Activities Fund is our Extended Day Program, which in typical years is a self-supporting activity. So all the revenue that comes in pays for all the expenses that are incurred. We could cut the Extended Day Program, but we'd just be cutting the revenue side and the expenditure side at the same time. It wouldn't gain us anything in the bottom line. There, see if there are any questions on that. Seeing none, I'm going to move on.
Actually, Leslie, sorry to get my hand up fast enough. It's Melanie. If I can ask one quick question. What else is in the community activities bucket besides extended day?
Sure. That is, and I'm going to do my budget real quick because it's in there. It has our planetarium, which is obviously closed right now. It has our aquatics program is in there. The humanities program that funds some, what am I trying to say? Some programs that go out to the schools, humanities. Our community centers, the ones that are shared community centers at Career Center, Gunston, Thomas Jefferson, and Carver Community Center. Yeah.
Thank you.
I had my hand up too.
Yep, Bob, go ahead.
The grants and restricted programs wedge. I think that, some people operate grants and perhaps make a little bit of money on it. I'm thinking of universities and stuff. When they can get grants, they can take slices off to fund other parts of the university, or at least higher administrative costs and stuff like that. So I'm just going to use the word honest, but I don't mean anything nefarious by using that word. How honest is that in and out equation? Is there not a way to operate any of that grant programs where we essentially make money, where we would bring more in than we actually spend?
I don't know. I don't know how universities operate. I've never worked in a university environment, but I will say that the large majority of our grants and restricted programs fund is our title grants and our IDEA grant that are all federal grants. And believe you me, if you go through a federal audit, you better have all your ducks in a row. And there are very, very, very strict parameters around how those funds are spent.
So
I don't know what it is that universities do, that they get grants and then they can use funds. The only thing that I can think of is what's called the indirect cost rate, that allows you to use some of the grant to help offset
overhead
expenditures, overhead and whatnot.
Yeah,
yes.
Right.
The problem with that is that means that there's less money to spend on the things that the grant is intended for. So there would be less funding for under IDEA for actual special education services for students. And under the titles, there would be less Title I funding for staffing and other things at the Title I schools. So we've chosen not to do that because, in the end, if the Title I funding provides, I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of noise and feedback. Make sure that you have your microphones turned off. Thank you. So if we have Title I funding and we fund 10 Title I reading and math teachers, and then we choose to take the indirect cost rate and apply that to the operating budget to cover overhead, then we can only have, and I'm making this up, but it's an example, 9 Title I reading and math teachers, and they really need 10. So then the operating budget picks up the other 1 Title I teacher, and then that's where the indirect costs go. So
what I hear you saying is that we actually operate those programs at a loss because we contribute the overhead without reimbursement for them. We choose to not tap into the funds to cover any additional administrative costs and overhead. We eat that.
Yes. Yes, that would be correct. Catherine.
With the historically low interest rates, is there any upside for us in I don't know, refinancing or lowering interest rates?
You're talking about
that whole debt service area?
Can everybody make sure that they're muted?
I'm sorry. Could you understand my question?
Yes, I got your question. I'm just getting a lot of feedback when I speak. So was trying to get people to mute themselves. Yes, there is the possibility for that, but that resides at the hands of the county. Our debt service is issued by the county, and they're the ones who are basically in charge of deciding whether or not to go back out to the market and refund the bonds. I will say that in every other year where we've had the opportunity to refund bonds, they have done so. I would expect that this year would be similar and coming years would be the same as well. Does that answer your question? I'm going to assume so. Okay. Deidre?
Hey, I'm sorry if I missed this, but what is the capital projects, the 0.3%?
That's MCMM. That doesn't answer your question. MCMM is the minor construction major maintenance fund that typically does things like playgrounds and theater lights and asbestos checking and ADA improvements and lighting and.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks. I guess I'm just wondering, does it include the retrofitting of schools where they're moving schools, where APS is moving schools?
We have budgeted for that separately in the CIP, not part of the annual MCMM budget because it's typically one time. And so there's a specific project in the CIP for that. The MCMM is really ongoing maintenance to the buildings. I'm looking at my budget now: flooring, painting, small HVAC projects, concrete and paving, doing things on the fields and grounds, buying new kitchen equipment, smaller things like that. When we do a retrofit, that's a much larger project.
Okay.
So we budget for that separately in the CIP.
I guess just one related question then, if there's any sort of HVAC improvements that have to be made to schools, would it be, that would probably fit under the CARES funding instead of this small capital MCCM line, right?
If we had to do HVAC improvements directly related to health and safety as a result of COVID, then yes, we could request reimbursement from CARES. But if it's just an HVAC project that changes out the controls or something like that, then no.
So if it's the latter, it would come from this capital project / MCCM?
Yeah, from the capital projects fund or MCMM, right.
Thank you.
Sure.
I'm just going to double check. Catherine, did you have another question? Because your hand is still up. Oh, no, your hand went down.
All right, I'm going to assume that means no more questions, and I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on to the school operating fund. And as you can see here, the school operating fund is about $560 million. And this is really the majority of our day-to-day operations in the school system. And that makes up 83.5% of our overall budget. That 83.5% is shown here in this graph, this chart. And of that 83.5%, almost 70% is in the schools, and then about just over 30% is in departments. And what I want to talk about tonight is to delve a little deeper into the departments, because I know that there's often questions and discussion about the central office departments and funding that they have. So we can see here that teaching and learning is the largest department in the entire budget at 11.3%, followed by the facilities and operations budget. And I want to delve a little bit into both of those. And I will preface this by saying this is information as we go forward here, and you'll see the difference in the slides. This is information from last year's presentations. It's the 2020 adopted budget. We just did not have time to put this together for this year. But you can see by looking at these coming slides how each of these department budgets shakes out and gives you a little bit more detail into each of them. So for example, in the Department of Teaching and Learning, the budget for FY20, that's the FY20 adopted budget on the far right, was $62.6 million, and it was divvied out into each of these primary areas within the Department of Teaching and Learning budget. And of course, the majority was in special education, followed by curriculum and instruction, which covers all of our core areas of instruction, student services, which also includes psychologists and social workers, and then smaller budgets therein. Of the $62.6 million, we looked at, and because our budget, this is one thing I didn't have in our slides, our budget is, the overall budget is about 80% salaries and benefits. But if you look just at the school operating fund, it's just under 90% salaries and benefits. So when we look at this 83.5% right here, 90% of that is salaries and benefits. So we spend 90% of our budget, our $560 million budget, 90% of it is on salaries and benefits or people. So when we look at the 62.6 budget, it funds a lot of people. And when we looked at the people that it funds, we found that in that budget, 103 people are not school-based, that are in the central office and they do their jobs in central office. But almost 264 people are positions that go out to the schools and are in the schools on a daily basis. These are employees that are staff members that are coded, budgeted in Department of Teaching and Learning, but are actually providing all of those services directly to the schools. So I think that breaks out to be 70-30, something like that, in that of that budget. So 70% being directly for the schools and 30% being the administrative portion of teaching and learning that helps support those staff and schools. I see some chat going on. Let's see. All right, great. Thank you, Chuck. And I'm sorry that it's not this year's, but I think it applies. I don't think it's going to change very much as we go from year to year. It's very, very, very much the same. So that's the Department of Teaching and Learning. That's the #1 largest departmental budget. And the next budget is facilities and operations. And when we look at facilities and operations, what we see very clearly is that the transportation budget for our school system is the largest portion of our facilities and operations budget. And that is all of those bus drivers and bus attendants and dispatchers and trainers and all of the people that we need to ensure that our buses are on the road and that our students get to and from school safely and to all of their activities in a normal year that they have outside of the school district. And then that's followed by our maintenance budget. And this is our day-to-day maintenance budget for the schools. That covers all of our HVAC maintenance, any maintenance that you can think of that happens in a school, whether it's plumbing or carpentry or electricity or HVAC or, you know, issues with doors and windows and bathrooms, so many bathrooms and gym floors and all of those things. That is covered in our maintenance budget. And don't have the exact number on me, but we have probably 5 million square feet, I believe 5 million square feet worth of facilities in our school district. So that's a lot. It's a lot to maintain. Our plant operations and other plant operations fund itinerant custodians that are basically substitute custodians that go to schools when other custodians can't be there. They're, you know, out on leave or sick. They're out sick, whatever it is. We have our risk management budget. Sorry, I went too far. A risk management budget, and this is all of the insurance that we pay for, as well as some leases for our buildings, SIFAX, the Marshall Building, other places that we have a lease for, and then also some vehicle maintenance and repairs in that budget. The large majority of that is insurance and leases, building leases. Facilities and operations, that's mainly our administrative aspects. So it gives you an idea of what's included in facilities and operations and where most of that money is being spent and why it's being spent there. I see questions. Hold on, let me see. Deidre?
Yeah, so in the facilities and operations, I think I've asked this question before, and I may just not be asking it the right way, so bear with me. But due to the closure that we've experienced since roughly last March, would we see any sort of credits or less than what we need to spend in facilities and operations since we're not maintaining schools?
Yeah, we will see some, but we'll see some savings in utilities, but of course we can't cut off all the utilities to the buildings just because they're not being used. We have to still condition the air and run water and all of those things. We've had custodians in all of our buildings to keep them running, to make sure that, you know, there's not a leaky pipe that has exploded somewhere and ruined 18 classrooms. We have elected to continue to pay all of our staff up to this point for doing what they need to do, or, you know, just to keep them on board. For example,
so is the payment of the staff actually captured in facilities and operations, or is that in the personnel?
Every budget pays for its own personnel. So this position summary that you see over here, all 376.75 positions that are listed here are paid out of these funds over here.
Got it. I just, I don't know. I continue to just have, I guess, some general questions around this because, you know, I think we'll be going into March with perhaps a full year of shutting down all of the schools that I just don't see why we wouldn't be capturing a pretty good amount of savings in that category, although I understand all of your caveats.
Okay, so name an area, and this is just so I get an understanding of what you think, where you think those savings will be and how much you think those savings should be. So name an area where you believe we will have savings.
Well, I'm just thinking like, and this is just brainstorming, but even though we've had to air condition or run air conditioning in schools, it isn't to the point that we've had to where we have like, I'll use Key for an example, had 750 kids in a building, such that the air conditioning had to be running at a rate that reached and helped the help the school in terms of actually dealing with the number of kids there. Like it almost strikes me as that we could be running schools at a lower sort of HVAC rate. I don't know, almost like what you do when you.
We have actually done that. We have reduced the temperature from what we would normally run it at. So for example, if we normally keep our buildings at, I'm making this up because I don't know exactly what the numbers are. We normally keep our buildings at 72 degrees. When they were being air conditioned, we bumped them up to 78 degrees. So we did do a lot of that.
Okay.
What I'm curious about is how much you think that would generate in savings.
Well, I don't have a good sense of how the facilities and operations breaks down. It's just one of those things that it's just been in sort of the front of my mind since we haven't been in the school since March.
So no guesstimate for me? I'm putting you on the spot.
Oh, you're asking for a guesstimate.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't do that to you. I'm being mean. I'm sorry. So
no. Do you actually have a number?
I'm going back to.
That's right.
The savings projection slide, and I'm going to point out where we have electricity.
Okay, got it.
Gas savings, but again, this is for the first quarter because we didn't know what was going to happen after the first quarter. So our buildings have been closed. This is the savings that we will have seen from July 1 through the first quarter. We're not going to be in, no one in our buildings after the first quarter. We're going to be bringing students and people back into the buildings starting October 29th, which is before the end of the first quarter. So we're going to have to condition all those buildings at the regular temperature. So we're not going to see much more than this. Our total utilities bill is, I think it's about somewhere between 5 and 6 million, I think. So, 0.52 at this point. It might be more as we move further into the year and we look at where we are right now versus where we were last year at this time, and see how it moves forward and how the utility bills start coming in. We'll keep an eye on that, but we've looked at that. We are counting some of that here already. And we'll continue to look at that and bring those estimates forward as we have them.
Sounds good. Thank you, Leslie.
Welcome. Sorry to
burst my bubble.
Needle you.
No, it's fine. I'm used to it.
Let's see. I think there were more questions.
One from Nellie, and then you just have a question in the chat around whether or not you'll release the PowerPoint to us. But now,
Absolutely.
Okay, great, thank you. And if you send it to me, Leslie, the PowerPoint, I can send it to everyone.
Okay.
But Nellie had her hand up. Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, I was just wondering where crossing guards fall under those position summaries.
They don't fall anywhere in any of this budget because they're paid for by the county.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
And the $500,000 in fuel savings, are there any buses running right now, or is that considered like, we've just saved the entirety of the fuel budget?
No, there are buses running right now. We have students that are being taken to various schools that are in session. They're mainly our special needs students that have placements outside of APS, and we've been taking them there, as well as we've been doing food deliveries with buses.
Great, thank you.
And okay, that's Nelly. All right. I'm going to move on. The next largest budget in the departments is human resources. They have, in FY20, they had a $21 million budget. It broke down in this way. The human resources staff that you see, or that we have on the 4th floor of SIFAX, that provides support to all of our employees, is listed here in the human resources budget. Our substitute budget is also under the human resources area in the Department of Human Resources. So all of the substitutes that are paid for, and teachers, assistants, everyone is in the human resources budget. We've been overspending our substitute budget over the last several years, and we are trying to phase in an increase in that budget so that it more closely mirrors our actual expenditures. We do have some savings in the current year for substitutes, but the large majority of the substitute budget that we pay is for our school-based subs. Every school has a school-based sub associated with it, and our long-term subs for those staff that go out on long-term leave, for whatever reason that might be. We hire a long-term sub for that. So I think it's only about 10% of our substitute budget that's used for those daily one-off. Teacher calls in sick one day and we need a substitute for them. That's typically what we spend those funds on. We have our payroll staff. Employee benefits, this covers a multitude of different things, and that includes, pull my book out so I can look at it. Things like the scholarship funds for employees, which I think we got rid of in FY21 because of the shortfall that we had in the spring. Let me think what else is in here. Oh, that staffing contingency that I talked about previously is that's in the human resources budget. Wait. Sorry. I should know this off the top of my head. Yes, the staff contingency budget, which is a little over $5 million, is embedded in this $6.4 million. So when you see $6.4 million for human resources staff, be aware that most of that is for staffing contingency for the schools. Employee benefits, what's in here? Sorry, I should know this. It's primarily health insurance premiums for retirees, separation pay for employees that retire and are paid out their leave. And I will say that at least half, a little over half, is for the health insurance premiums for retirees. Our workers' compensation, our unemployment insurance, FICA on the separation pay, and transportation demand management. And then our employee assistance program. And that program actually is a shared program with the county. We pay for the, actually we pay for the entire thing, and then we have a credit in the budget from the county for half of it. So all the employees are APS employees, but the county pays half of it. And that's why you see only 490,000 here. It's typically double that. There, questions on human resources? And move on. Next, we have information services. That is the next largest budget at 16.
Leslie, I'm sorry to be so slow in getting my hand up in audio on. Back on the human resources, when it is styled as human resources under human resources, is that just staff salary? Is that what that means? What does human resources underneath the human resources budget mean?
That's typically the administration aspects of human resources. So the assistant
All the paying for all the
superintendent,
positions on the right.
right? So the assistant superintendent, the 3 directors, 3 supervisors, except for the payroll employees that are in this line item here. Most of these employees are in this line item here, with the understanding that over 5 million, like 5.5 million of this, 6.4 million is staff contingency that is not used by human resources. It's used in the schools.
And I'm just gonna do a quick time check. This is Melanie. I'm just gonna do a quick time check.
Oh my God.
8:49, and Chuck and I just need a few minutes at the end just to talk about our next steps on collecting committee input and getting everybody matched. I think you have 2 pages. If you want to show us those 2 pages really quick, and then we'll take it back.
Yep.
This has been amazing, but maybe we'll just hold the rest of the questions and follow up at another time.
Sure.
But just show us the last information quickly. Thank you.
Sure. I'm sorry.
No, you were not. We were asking great questions, and this was fantastic. So no apologies needed.
Okay, thanks. So information services, about $16.8 million. It breaks out into our information services management, which is really the overhead administrative aspect of it. Our service support center, which is all of the people that help, like the help center, and all of our technical support center technicians that go out into the schools and help our central office and administrative staff. And then enterprise solutions, these are all of the folks that deal with all of our systems, like our student information system, our financial management and human resources systems, and every other system like the Parent View and the Engage, and all of those are managed through enterprise solutions. And then the next largest is finance. The positions that you see here are all embedded either in the finance line here or the purchasing line here. Where it says other administrative accounts, these are all accounts that are system-wide that pay for things other than finance department things. I just manage them for the school system. So let me tell you what some of those things are very quickly. Things like legal services for the entire district, the OPEB reserve that we have to pay for our other post-employment benefits, the contribution that we make to the trust fund every year, that's in here. When we have, in the last few years, and in 2020, this was the case, when we had the, bringing certain positions to market, and we phased that in over 3 years, the lump sum for the phase-in for that year was put in the finance budget until all of the changes were made in the salaries of those people. So, it's difficult to determine who's going to be there and when before the budget is actually in place for the year. So we put that as a line item in the finance budget to account for that increase in salary. I already talked about legal fees. And then a lot of the administrative accounts for furniture and equipment, additional furniture and equipment and replacement are in the finance budget in this line item as well. So we go back to the savings that we talked about, that $2.1 million, that came straight out of that line item that was in finance and management services. And then very, very quickly, these are the discussion questions that we provided to all of the advisory committees and advisory groups to talk about when they go back to their respective committees and groups to talk about the FY21 budget and the FY22 budget. And this was to help them direct the conversation. They could use these or not, depending on how they felt, if they wanted to frame it in a different way. So we talked about priorities. We talked about trade-offs. You know, what should we reduce? What should we not touch? And then some questions about communication so that we understood how people wanted to communicate with us and what kind of information they wanted to receive and how often. So that's it. I'm done. I will send you the presentation.
Fantastic. So thank you so much,
Sure.
Leslie. That was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and doing it in so much detail. And thank you everyone for the great questions. I think that was well worth the time and I appreciate it. It leaves us with a couple of minutes to sum up, which I will do, and also call in Chuck for a minute. Let me turn my camera back on as I'm talking so that you can see me as well. There we go. Here I am. Hi, everybody. A couple things. So as you heard me say from at the beginning of Leslie's presentation, all of the committees are coming up with their ideas on what they think is in their area sacrosanct in the budget, what they really don't want to touch, but they're also coming up with ideas on to help Leslie and the board with ideas on how we can close the budget gap this year and going forward into next year. So BAC is one of those committees, and we want to help generate ideas. The good news is that we know the budget from our years working with the budget itself, and for those who've been on the committee from hearing in the past what has been proposed in terms of potential areas for savings. We also have the opportunity, a number of you have raised your hands, and thank you for that, to go out and spend time with some of the other committees that know other areas of the operations very deeply, and therefore you will be part of those conversations where they are generating additional ideas. And so we would like to pull together the collection of our ideas that we have as a committee from our own experiences, from our work on BAC and understanding the budget, and from being part of those conversations, and pull them together into our report or our collection of ideas of where we think the opportunities are, so that we also can be helpful to Leslie, her team, and the board at this time. So these ideas are due in November. Our next meeting is not slated until the 18th of November, and we have actually offered that meeting as a session for any of the committee heads that would like to actually come and share their ideas along with us, so that it is in a forum where everyone can hear each other's ideas and discuss them, and so that it is a place where we can all have transparency and understand what kinds of ideas are being proposed as we go into the budget season. That means between now and early November, we need to share our ideas and pull them together as a group. And so I will send out a note to everyone asking folks to send me and Chuck their ideas. If you've been on the committee for some time, you may have more ideas. But if you haven't been very long, you still may be familiar with the school system given your experience. You may be spending time with one of these other committees and therefore have ideas from that. It doesn't matter where your ideas come from. You may have thought of some ideas tonight just in hearing this presentation. I know I had a couple of additional ideas I hadn't thought of before just in listening to Leslie this evening. And so please, I'll put out that call for ideas. Please send them. I'll bring them together, and then I'll share that out with folks so that you can see the collective ideas from this committee, give input before I finalize them, And then we can share them out with the other committees. Hopefully, other committees will take us up on our invitation, and at least some of them will come together with us and collectively share ideas and have a good dialogue in advance of Leslie needing to use those ideas to build the budget. But in our last 2 minutes, Chuck, do you want to talk about where you are on matching everyone to the committees? And so we have good back representation in those committees that would like to have some of our support.
Yeah, we're pretty well lashed up, except for that politely declined our offer, and it's it could be for a variety of reasons that are at this point really immaterial, because at the end of the day, all these meetings are public, so we can still listen in and hear their ideas and feedback. So if we don't have a formal role where we've been matched and the committee would welcomes our participation, we can still listen in and still take those ideas back to us, so we at least have a sense of direction of where these other committees are going. So I'm down to 3 that I don't have dates and times for their next meeting, and that's because they're not publicly posted. So I'm working directly with their chairs to ferret out that information. But for the most part, everyone else has been matched. What I would say, I had a couple questions about our role and what types of things to think about, and I kind of put it in 3 categories. One is if you can help answer questions about the budget, that's one area, but also in terms of us is helping us have a sense of direction for where these committees are looking for their ideas, and since we have to opine, so to speak, on that, it gives us a little bit more heads up time to be able to think about these ideas and how we may frame our recommendation as a council back to the school board. And then finally, just facilitating dialogue between us and that respective committee. If there's things that maybe we could think about and help them, with a little bit better understanding, given our position as the back, then that's another area where I think we could be helpful to these other committees that don't necessarily deal year in and year out with the budget writ large.
Yeah. So as you go to these other meetings, please take notes. Please share your notes with this group. But then if you think that there are certain ideas that they had which are particularly good, take those out and send those to Chuck and myself specifically. I will send a note around specifically about this, so exactly what to do after these. But remember, one thing is that we have to be careful not to conduct a separate meeting over email. And I'll tell you, there are certain rules around how we converse on email. So we're not using email as an additional public meeting and excluding folks. So I'll send the rules out when I send the note, and I ask people to please respect them. We want to make sure that we're conducting our meetings publicly so everyone can see them, and we're following those rules, and which is why we're recording this evening, so that people can follow our public group meetings in a transparent fashion like this evening.
The last thing I would add, Melanie, the newly adopted budget document for this current year budget has been posted. That link was sent out to everyone. So if you're new to the back, focusing on the executive summary portion will help you as you go into those meetings, getting a sense of the size and scale of those budget areas, so that at least some baseline information before you walk into those meetings.
Great. Excellent. Yes, please take a look at that. And with that, I will adjourn this meeting since we're already at 9:01, although Monique is popping up. Monique, would you like to say something before we adjourn?
I would. Thank you so much. I just want to thank you all so much for taking on this role and diving in so much more deeply than you have done in the past. I think this will be incredibly helpful for us as we look forward. So I'm just so excited about the opportunity to change things up, and for you guys to hear from folks, and for people to be able to lean on your knowledge. So thank you.
Thank you, Monique. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Look forward to all the discussion and dialogue over the next few weeks, and to seeing everyone again as a collective group in November.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Great questions tonight.
Thank you, Leslie.